Welcome to episode 284 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agents Jim Lewis and Renae McDermott, who review their 1999 Miami abduction case, where a mother and her two children were kidnapped for ransom and held for 4 days before Jim and Renae located them and they were rescued by the Miami Division SWAT team. In addition to the safe return of the family, the spectacular work of the investigative team and detectives from the Sunny Isles Beach Police Department, with assistance from FBI polygraphers, SWAT, surveillance, ERT, and technically trained agents and phone tracking, resulted in life sentences for 3 defendants and 2 others who received lengthy, multiple-year sentences. This case has been featured in Reader's Digest, Court TV, and Investigative Discovery. Jim Lewis served in the FBI for 25 years. During his career, he was assigned to the Miami Division, primarily working violent crimes and crimes against children matters. He was awarded the Federal Law Enforcement Officer of the Year in the state of Florida for developing and implementing the FBI's first Internet safety program for children. Jim was the recipient of the 2008 National Center for Missing and Exploited Children Award for his work dismantling a child exploitation network and the subsequent rescue of 12 children. He also received the United States Attorney General Missing Children Award for his investigation of a multi-state child exploitation ring. Later in his career, Jim was promoted to supervise the Miami Division's Violent Crimes Against Children Squad and Miami's Violent Crime Fugitive Task Force. Since retiring, Jim has been working as a private investigator based out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, for the DNR agency, providing investigative and protective security services. Renae McDermott served in the FBI for 32 years, 27 as a special agent. She began her bureau career as an FBI police officer, then as a physical science technician in the Firearms and Tool Marks Unit at the FBI laboratory. When she became an agent, she was assigned to the Miami Division, where she served for 10 years investigating public corruption, violent crime, and counterterrorism violations. Additionally, while in Miami, Renae was the airport liaison agent and team leader of the Miami Evidence Response Team. Later in her career, Renae received several promotions, first as supervisor in the Counterterrorism Division, Iraq Unit, and International Terrorism Operations Section 2 at FBI headquarters, supervisor of the Criminal Enterprise Squad in the Dallas Division, unit chief in the Human Resources Division back at FBI headquarters, assistant special agent in charge for the Albuquerque Division's Criminal, Cyber, and Administrative Branch, special assistant to FBI Director Comey, and special agent in charge of the Knoxville Field Office. FBI Director Ray selected Renae as the Deputy Assistant Director and then Assistant Director for the Training Division at Quantico, where she served until her retirement. Renae currently serves as a commander for the Albuquerque Police Department, overseeing the police academy. If you're listening to this episode the week it comes out, my birthday is Saturday, March 25th. And if you're wondering, I'm going to be 66 years old. Now, if you want to give me a birthday present, please continue to spread the word about FBI Retired Case File Review. Until I'm too old to continue to do so, I'm going to keep on sharing these amazing tales of bravery and tenacity as told to me by the FBI agents who work them. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com. You'll also find links to where you can buy me a cup of coffee, join my reader team, and learn more about me and my books. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, retired agents Renae McDermott and Jim Lewis. Hey, how you doing today?
Jerry, it's good to finally connect with you. And Renae, good morning.
Yes, Jim and Jerry, thanks for this opportunity.
I am happy to have you here today because we haven't had a good kidnapping case review in a while. And this one, of all the ones that I've done, is really wild because, well, I'm not going to get ahead of myself. I'm going to let either one of you introduce the case. Just give us a brief statement about what we're going to talk about today, and then let's get into it.
Sure. Yeah. So this was a kidnapping case that happened in the Miami Division in mid-December of 1999. Thankfully, it had a happy ending. It was almost 4.5 days of just really unbelievable investigative work by the whole division, numerous assets, numerous resources. Renae and I were just fortunate to have been assigned this case together the first day and saw it all the way through, and really began a lifelong friendship and a lifelong bond between the two of us.
Very good. So where do we want to start?
Renae, if you think it's right, I'll discuss a little bit of what happened the night before we were called in to kind of set the stage. And I can talk about how we got assigned the case, and we'll roll through it kind of day by day. So this event happened on December 13th of 1999, and it involved a extremely wealthy family living in Sunny Isles Beach, Florida, which is about 15 miles north of Miami Beach. The Aragal family was from Brazil. They lived in a penthouse high-rise condo on the beach. The family had all attended a Christmas party on December 13th. The people involved in this were Alceo Aragal, his wife Christine, their daughter Juliana, Junior Aragal, and baby Alexander. They were attending a Christmas party. Christine decided to leave the party early. The baby was fussy, and she ended up driving Alceo's Porsche, which is significant, home with Junior and the baby. And she never drove the Porsche. That was not her car to drive. Alceo always drove that Porsche. So she gets home. A little while later, Alceo gets home and sees the Porsche in the garage. He goes to his condo, and Christine and two of the children are not there. He also notices that his Lincoln Navigator is missing. So he thinks that maybe she's gone out, run an errand. He begins to look for her up and down Collins Avenue on Miami Beach. He can't find her. He begins to worry. And finally, he calls the local police at around 3 a.m. Patrol officers from the Sunny Isles Beach Police Department arrive at the scene, and they begin an initial investigation, and they do a very good job. It's a small jurisdiction, but they begin to work this case kind of through the night. The detectives find a few drops of blood and some scuff marks on the garage floor. And they find out that shortly after 9:00 p.m., a witness, a resident of the condo building, heard a woman scream and reported it to a security guard. And the security guard asked the valet parking attendant, whose name was Gene Ferreira, to go investigate it. Ferreira goes down in the garage and reports back that he didn't find anything unusual. And of course, Renae and I find out later on why he made that report, that he didn't find anything unusual going on. Renae, did I forget anything? Kind of set the stage there?
No, you set the stage well. I just wanted to add, Seo's driving up and down Collins looking for the Navigator. The low jack, which was installed in the vehicle, was not working. And we later found out that they had disconnected that. That vehicle was found several days later in a parking structure on Miami Beach.
That's the first night when Christine goes missing. Tuesday morning, December 14th, I walk into the squad area, and at the time I had about 2.5 years on the Miami C1 bank robbery squad. That squad was, Jerry, the same squad involved in the 1986 Miami shootout. And I think I can speak for Renae that we were both incredibly honored and fortunate to be on that squad and kind of carrying out the legacy of the work that had been done on that squad before, during, and after the 86 shootout. I remember walking into the squad area, and Steve Warner was our boss, and he had actually been there that day back in 1986. He was a legendary bank robbery supervisor, my first supervisor in the FBI. He told Renae and I to go over Sunny Isles Beach, something about a missing woman and her two children, go meet with the PD and see how we could help. Renae and I were trying to remember. I can't remember if you were on standby duty or not, or was it Steve Warner line of sight supervision? Probably the latter.
Probably then Steve's Modus operandi. If he saw you, you were it.
Yeah. Renae and I kind of pack up our stuff. We traveled over together over to the beach, and we were joined by Special Agent Ed Knapp, who was on the squad with us. The funny thing about it, Renae, Ed, and I all lived in the same neighborhood, essentially on the same street, about 6 houses apart from each other at the time that this happened. I can say this was the beginning of lifelong friendship and a bond between the three of us. Pushing through this case and sharing this experience, it really started things off for us. Renae, you want to talk a little bit about that morning, maybe going over to the condo and your recollections?
Sure. As Jim said, we arrived. We met the Sunny Isles Beach detective at the condo, went down, looked at the parking garage area, noticed that blood spots, fingernail drag marks, several cars, which Alceo owned, as he was a wealthy Brazilian business person and former race car driver in Brazil. So he had a Ferrari, Porsche, the Navigator, which was gone, which the abductors took. And at that point, we then made our way upstairs to speak with Alceo. And we go to the 29th floor of this beautiful condominium to meet Alceo. And he opens the door. He's somewhat distraught. He starts telling us the story of what he did the night before, when he got home after Christine and the boys left the Christmas party, and then what he did through the night and leading up to our meeting that morning. While Jim was talking to him, he allowed us to walk through the condominium, which Ed and I did, just looking to see if things were out of place, anything unusual. Because as Jerry and Jim and most of your listeners, when there's a family member that goes missing and some children, 9 chances out of 10, the family member that you're interviewing becomes the prime suspect until otherwise determined that they are not. So we were empathetic, sympathetic, and respectful of their place, their home. And as Jim was getting the basic facts along with the Sunny Isles PD detectives, Ed and I were just walking around, which we had the acknowledgement from Alceo to do, just taking a quick look around. At that point, we determined something wasn't right. Ed had also gone downstairs to speak with Jean Farrar, the valet parking attendant who worked at the condominium and was very close to this family. So the valet parking attendant had access, obviously, to the garage, all the keys of the residents in that building in the lockbox behind their desk and in their office area. Ed did the initial interview of Jean Farrar and realized that he's got the weight of the world, it seemed, on his shoulders, and he was acting very suspiciously. At that point, Ed, being a former Navy SEAL, Jim and I had advised him, just stay on Gene, start watching him, conduct surveillances, as we were starting to schedule polygraphs to be done, primarily of Alceo first, to eliminate him from being involved. And at that time, more agents started arriving at the condo, and we set up a makeshift command post in their condominium.
The one thing I remember about Ed's initial interview with him, Renae had mentioned, described him as having the weight of the world on his shoulders and a lot on his mind. It seemed like he had a lot on his mind. But then Ed said that Ferreira had switched shifts with another attendant to work that night. And knowing Ed's focus and determination, Renae had mentioned he was a former Navy SEAL. Renae and I are like, Ed, that's your guy. You have your mission. Stay on him. Renae is correct. We set up polygraphs of all the attendants, the parking attendants, and Alceo readily agreed to submit to a polygraph examination the next day. Because we didn't know whether this was a domestic dispute, was a business-related thing. Obviously, something had happened in the garage. She was missing. The car was missing. But I recall more and more agents coming over, the makeshift command posts, getting recorders on the phone. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, this FBI machine is starting to crank up. It's starting to roll. It's starting to gain momentum with the resources from the office. Alceo got a very brief, quick call from Christine on his cell phone at some point that day. He indicated that she sounded very weird and robotic. And we kind of realized early on that he was telling her what to say, forcing her to speak. For that first day, it was a long day. We had people stay overnight in the command post just in case more calls came in or she returned home or something along those lines.
I know that you needed to do the polygraph, but I was just wondering what your gut was saying, Jim and Renae. Did you feel that he was telling the truth and that something had happened?
I think for me, yes. Initially, we were a little, okay, what the heck is going on here? He obviously was distraught. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, like Renae had indicated earlier, 9 times out of 10, these are family, domestic related. So I did have a small element of doubt. And I thought that the polygraph, if he agreed and passed, would kind of eliminate that doubt and get him on Team FBI. What did you think, Renae?
The same thing. I was skeptical as our drive over. We were having discussion about the different possibilities. Once we arrived there, saw the condominium. And then when we got upstairs, it was an immaculate 29th floor, 2-level condominium overlooking the beach, immaculate condition. Like I said, when Ed and I walked around as Jim and the detective were speaking to Alceo, nothing was out of place. There were no indications of any kind of fight. Gosh, I just remember it being just pristine. It was beautiful and immaculate. So after we saw what we saw in the basement, he indicated that the navigator was gone and he couldn't find the navigator with the LoJack either wasn't working, which we found out was disconnected. It started to become clear by the end of that night that considering he got the phone call where she was being forced to speak, it was very robotic, that we had to eliminate him and others so we could focus and key in on what and who our main subjects were possibly going to be for this investigation.
Yeah, one of the things that Renae and I also considered that Juliana, Alceo and Christine's 12-year-old daughter, was not with Christine at the time that Christine allegedly went missing. She was with Alceo. She was upset. Her mom and her 2 brothers were missing. So that did give a little credence to Alceo's story that, yeah, maybe something had happened to Christine and the 2 boys.
In this part of Sunny Isles Beach, Florida, there's a large Brazilian population. So they had a lot of friends that were coming over to the condo while we were all there in support of Alceo and Juliana and actually watching over her.
Pushing into Wednesday, December 15th, this turned out to be a pretty big day in the investigation. Alceo comes over to the field office. He is set up for a polygraph that morning. He passes with flying colors and really is a part of the team until this investigation concludes. We have recorders put in place on his cell phone, the landline, got a trap and trace set up for incoming calls, and more agents are becoming involved in the case. This case is starting to ripple through the office, so to speak. Gene Ferrer, the valet parking attendant, comes in and fails his polygraph miserably about Christine's disappearance. He does not confess, but he is obviously a strong person of interest. And Renae and I talked with Ed. Ed, this is your guy. Ed organizes a surveillance of him after Gene is brought back to his house. Later that evening, I think this is probably the first big break in the case. Gene Ferrer is working a secondary job as a valet parking attendant at a local restaurant in Coconut Grove. Ed and his partner are surveilling him. Torrential downpour, Miami downpour, and they watch Ferrer go to a payphone, shows you how old we are here. And he makes a very animated and lengthy phone call from kind of a out of the way payphone in this downpour. We ended up tracing that call and learned Ferrer called an individual by the name of Ewan Oscar Martinez. And I think that's when Martinez's name first kind of surfaces. We realized that call, because Ferrer was getting soaking wet, had to have been an important phone call. So the U.S. Attorney's Office was on board with this point. We get some emergency subpoenas out, and we determined that Ewan Oscar Martinez had a flurry of phone calls and messages just prior and right after the abduction. And several of those calls were from Gene Ferrer, the on-duty park attendant on the night of the abduction. Renae, you remember anything else for that Wednesday?
That was the break we needed in the case to send us in a direction where we could focus.
Okay, so pushing into Thursday, December 16th, we get more phone calls from Christine to Alceo. My family has always made fun of me. I made a statement during a prior media coverage of this, that those phone calls were important because Christine had to be somewhere. And my brother was like, really, Jim? She had to be somewhere? You figured that out, huh? But yeah, I mean, that was hopeful for us because, hey, she's alive. She's still making phone calls. And we remember talking to Alceo to try to stretch those phone calls out as long as possible. So the tech guys who are now involved, technically trained agents, a great bunch of skilled investigators, they're involved and they're trying to track down the origin of those calls. We did learn from one of the calls after Junior got on the phone and he told his dad that his mom, Christine, had been injured with some sort of, quote, electricity. And we didn't know what that was, but assumed that she had been shocked with a taser. We learned from the calls that Christine had been writing a letter and that letter was going to be delivered to Alceo's office in Miami on Friday. That letter never arrived. So at this point, Jerry, there's a full command post at the Miami Division. We have a ton of people involved, language services and analysts at that point, agents from other squads, the whole bit. So pushing into Friday, which would be the 17th, and thankfully the last day, we get a few more phone calls to Alceo's phone. Renae and I and another agent, Junior Ortiz, were out in a particular area northwest of Sunny Isles Beach where the tech guys thought the phone calls might be. They were trying to triangulate the calls using sophisticated techniques of tracking cell phones. At around 3:45 p.m., I remember it very distinctly, the tech agent told us those phone calls from Christine are coming from that house right there. And he pointed out the house. I get goosebumps now thinking about it. They said 100% good to go. So we set up a perimeter around the house and obviously let the executive management know. And we held that perimeter for what turned out to be about 7 hours. The SWAT team started to get ready. We had an SAC at the time, Hector Pesquera. And I think back on that decision that he made, especially after I later became a supervisor and Renae later became an SAC. He had the guts to make that call, that this was going to be a dynamic hostage rescue. And I want to say it was the first of its kind in the Miami Division. So SWAT is getting ready. They were practicing their entries in, I think, the office parking lot. Renae and I obtained the floor plan to the house from the owner. That house was being rented. I want to say Ewan Oscar Martinez, his name popped up again on the rental, and we set up the perimeter of the house. Renae, what's your recollection of those hours prior to the SWAT making entry?
Yeah, once the tech agents had advised that that was the home, as Jim indicated, we stood up surveillance. I was down the street about 5 houses on the right-hand side, facing south as the house was on my left, and maintained the eye on the house to see if anybody would come and go, and also just in preparation for the SWAT team for their safety and security. I mean, we had what the unknowns were in the home, but making sure that no other people arrived or that they didn't leave. So had a team conducting that surveillance, waiting for the SWAT team to get ready to execute their entry. As Jim indicated, they were practicing in the parking lot of the Miami office, which they had duct tape set up after we had obtained the floor plans from the owners who rented that home on a short-time rental basis. Ewan Martinez had been renting it already for approximately 3 weeks. So that had been his plan all along to bring who he thought was going to be Alceo there. He ended up with Christine and the 2 children. They really didn't know how to care for because they were not expecting that. In the meantime, it was raining. Set the scene. It was drizzling. It started to drizzle rain in that evening as the sun set, and multiple calls were being made from Christine to Alceo. And as Jim indicated, SAC Pesquera had given the go-ahead for the SWAT team to execute the dynamic entry at around 10:45. And the SWAT team at that time was being led by Alexis Vasquez, aka Spike was his nickname. He led the SWAT team through that entry.
A little bit about the entry. Jerry, I should have known then that Renae was destined for executive management and to be an SAC because I was getting soaked in the back parking lot while she was dry in her car. So that should have been a clue. So yeah, SWAT does the dynamic entry at 10:45. The initial breach failed. They ordered a secondary breach.
What do you mean the initial breach failed? If that happened, it sounds like you gave the kidnappers time to realize that somebody was coming in. Could you explain that more?
Sure. Yeah. It's my recollection that when they went to the first door, that the breaching of that door did not work properly. And Spike ordered a secondary breach at the rear door. They threw flashbangs in to disorient whoever might be inside. I remember that distinctly. They very, very quickly and expertly then entered the house, went through the house. One of the kidnappers was on the couch, and Christine and the two children were found along with Ewan Oscar Martinez. The whole thing felt like forever, but in reality, due to their expertise, they did it very quickly and adapted and overcome the initial problem at the door.
This entire time, Christine was being told by Ewan that he was hired by the Brazilian mafia to kidnap them and kill them. So that's what she had been told, that couple days she was being held along with her sons. During those phone calls, they were trying to lure Alceo and Juliana to a location in Ocala, Florida, to their ranch, where they also were going to abduct Alceo and Juliana. They had passports already in their name with their pictures on the passports. They were going to assume their identities. They planned on getting their bank account numbers and just assuming their identities and going back to Venezuela. I say that because when the SWAT team made the entry, Ewan put Christine and the two boys in a bathroom and said that the Brazilian mafia was here. And in reality, it was the FBI going in to save them.
SWAT does the entry. They rescue Christine and the two boys, and Ewan and Pedro Caraballo Martinez, no relation, are arrested inside the house and brought outside. I remember we had an ambulance there, that Christine's facial injuries were horrific. She had multiple broken bones. Her eye socket was fractured. Her cheekbones were fractured. She was a mess. And I remember introducing myself quickly to her. She was being loaded into the back of the ambulance. And I remember she said, "What took you so long?" And it dawned on me how long those 4.5 days must have truly been for her. Held at the house. We later determined that she, for many of those hours and days, she had been Velcroed to a lawn chair, restrained in a lawn chair inside a dark closet with a mask over her eyes. Her kids were in the other room. They were all isolated. So just an incredible moment, obviously, for the FBI, but there was a lot of work that still needed to be done.
That sounds just terrifying. As a mother, thinking it's bad enough being restrained and beaten by these kidnappers, but not having access to your kids. And how old were the kids again?
Junior was approximately 8, I believe, and baby Alexander was 9 months, a year.
Wow. And who was taking care of these kids?
Yeah, that's kind of the plot thickens a little bit. The kidnappers did the best they could, but they had help from a female by the name of Ada Torrealba, who got diapers, brought over feed, that sort of stuff. And about 9 or 10 months later, she was tracked down and arrested with her brother for their involvement in the kidnapping and the carjacking. Her brother was Edgar Torrealba. He was actually there in the garage and took part in the kidnapping. A little bit about Ewan Oscar Martinez. He was this huge, very strong man who was like a cult-like leader of a group of young adults that came over from Venezuela. These young adults, their parents trusted him to take their kids to the United States for a better life. You can maybe see where this is going. We eventually determined he had sexually abused every one of these kids, both male and female. He had just a hold on them, and they followed and listened to every word and everything that he said. So after Christine is led away in the ambulance, the ERT team, the Miami ERT team came. We obtained search warrants for the house, and a treasure trove of evidence was found in the house. Some of it was just unbelievable what they found and the work that they did. They found 5 lawn chairs in the house with straps, Velcro straps on them, leather gloves that we later determined were used by Martinez when he physically assaulted Christine. We found surveillance notes that Ferrer had taken while watching the family. A couple firearms, a laptop computer that had child pornography on it, pictures of the Aragao family, a ripped up extortion/ransom letter. And if you can believe it, ERT found containers of Morton salt that Ewen put in Christine's injuries on her face. Just kind of sealed their fate, obviously, the evidence that was found. Pouring salt in the wound, it makes it burn. I guess the theory is that it could be a healing mechanism, but just incredibly, incredibly painful for her. Jean Ferrer was arrested that night and brought over to the field office. He wasn't there at the house, but Ed and his team went and arrested him, brought him back over to the field office, and simultaneous interviews were taking place. All three of them confessed to their roles and actions for the kidnapping and the carjacking.
You had mentioned Martinez having these kids that he controlled. So I take it that Pedro and Friero were members of that group?
Yes.
I would like to add, too, that Jean Ferrer had befriended the family, as Jim indicated. He was the main valet parking attendant there. They trusted him. He befriended them. He would play with Junior when he got home from school. At one point in time, in a not so coincidental meeting, Ferrer had introduced Ewen Martinez to the family who was down on the beach at the time. We had later found pictures of the family, which Jean had taken. They were really developing patterns of the family, what everybody looked like, and even to the point where Ewen would play that beach paddleball with Junior after school on certain different occasions. So he really had a hold on Pedro, Jean, and the others that Jim had mentioned in a true cult-like fashion.
Renae and another agent interviewed Christine, and that was a very lengthy interview.
Yeah, we had started, obviously, once she arrived at the hospital. I went over there with another fellow agent. At the time, given the nature of her injuries and just the trauma that she had been through, we had decided that the interview would not take place that night. But once she was released from the hospital, which then the interview commenced the following day and lasted for approximately 3 days. It was probably one of the longest 302s I've ever done in my entire career. During that interview and during that time in front of her, you always hear about Stockholm Syndrome in these types of investigations. And I saw that come out true to form, where it's just giving me goosebumps right now, even recollecting that. She really, as her coping mechanism, developed positive feelings towards Ewen and those that took her and her sons in order to survive. Throughout that interview, she kept saying it was her fault, not their fault. They were trying to protect her from the Brazilian mafia that was going to kill them. It was truly shocking to sit in front of someone and interview someone. And I had been an agent for 5 years at this time, and I had never had anything like that happen.
How long did it take her to realize that she was the victim and that they had beat and tortured her in order to get money from her husband?
That is a good question. And even at the end of the 3 days after the interview was concluded, it still took her some time. She eventually saw a psychologist. And the irony of a small world situation, the psychologist was the mother of another agent that we worked with in the Miami Division, Sean Boyle. His mother testified during trial to the Stockholm Syndrome that was in full force with Christine. And I think through Christine working with her, it eventually fed its way out that she realized they were not there to help her. They were there to abduct the entire family and kill them.
Wow.
She struggled with the fear for years afterwards that she still wasn't safe from whoever. Friends of Ewen, other unknown co-conspirators. She truly lived in fear for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I think about all of the resources that the Bureau had and utilized in this investigation, from ERT, SWAT, language services, tech agents, polygraphers, SOG analysts. Victim services were huge in this case. And then, of course, our local law enforcement partners, Miami-Dade Police and the Sunny Isles Beach Police Department. It wasn't just Renae and I running this. we had help and support from everybody. So we were fortunate after we had two great assistant United States attorneys assigned to this case, Stacy Levine and Mike Brown, who were just a pleasure to work with, so smart, dedicated to pursuing justice for this. Stacy Levine and Christine had a remarkable bond up to and leading through trial and even afterwards. Mike Brown eventually became a federal judge and is now a federal judge in Atlanta. So it was a month-long trial. All three of them were convicted at the end. Junior Aragao testified via closed-circuit TV. He was in another room in the courthouse, and that had never been done before in the Southern District of Florida. Renae and I were remembering that these defense attorneys barely questioned Christine and Junior. I think they were smart enough to leave them alone when they were on the witness stand.
What was also telling, too, that I recall was when they had their clients on the stand, they pretty much asked a question, tell us what happened, and they sat back down and just let each and every one of them ramble on and speak this outlandish, unbelievable story, which you could see the jury was not buying either. So it was very interesting to watch that unfold from that perspective of the trial.
Well, you have to tell us what their defense was. What did they say happened? They've already confessed, but now they're still going to trial, trying to indicate that they were innocent. So what was their story?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I remember their defense being that they were hired by these unknown Brazilian mafias, and they were there to save Christine and the family from the mafia. That's my recollection as to their defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were, as I mentioned earlier, wanted to bring the whole family together to take a photograph of them as dead and send it to the, I'm doing air quotes right now, Brazilian mafia that hired them, because Ewan realized they were such a nice family that they couldn't go through with killing them. So they wanted to stage all of their deaths. So the Brazilian mafia would believe that they had done what they were asked to do on their behalf.
And that's their reasoning for beating Christina also, to indicate to the Brazilian mafia, I'll do air quotes too, that they were doing what they were assigned to do.
With Christine in the garage, I believe they beat her. Ewan hit her so many times in the face. I think that was to keep her quiet. I don't think that was part of the plan at that time. If I remember correctly, a resident heard a female scream from the garage. I think she was giving them a run for their money. And in order to stop her from screaming and bringing attention to them, they tased her and he punched her in the face numerous times. I don't think at that time that's why they punched her in the face in the garage.
I thought maybe they had punched her when she was being held captive.
That was all done in the garage.
If the listener can kind of put themselves for a moment in Ewan's shoes and his co-conspirators in the garage, they're waiting in the dark, hiding behind cars based on Ferrer's intel. And the Porsche comes driving up and they think Alceo's in the Porsche. So they're creeping forward and lo and behold, Christine and Junior and the baby get out of the car, but they've already committed. They've been exposed. They're in the open. They had no choice but to go through with it.
This is kind of out of order. You mentioned that Ferrer was interviewed. Who did those interviews?
SWAT agents and other experienced investigators.
Was he the one who told them about being molested and all of that?
No, I don't think that came out then. It didn't come out until later.
Is there anything that he said when he was brought back after being arrested and interviewed?
Yeah, he admitted to conducting surveillance of the family, to taking the valet key to the navigator, to monitoring the family's whereabouts. He provided a full confession and obviously implicated himself and others. All three individuals were given life sentences by the judge. And I remember a couple weeks after the sentencing, the judge held a special hearing to recognize and commend the actions of the FBI and that she wanted it on the official record of the court case. A few months after they were sentenced, we were still looking for whoever else might have been in the garage and involved in this. I received a tip and kind of worked that tip up. We figured out where one of the other co-conspirators was, Edgar Torrealba. We found him in Coral Gables, had a short little foot chase and arrested him and his sister, They both pled guilty and received very lengthy sentences for their role in the case. They knew better than to try to go to trial. It was going to be the same judge, and the writing was on the wall for them.
And that was the sister who had helped care for the kids?
Yes.
Edgar and Ada, one received 23 years and one received 16 years federal prison for their actions and part of this conspiracy and abduction.
A really cool thing happened after this case was, for all intents and purposes, over. We formed a great bond with this family. We would get together once or twice a year, get a cup of coffee, catch up on what the kids were doing. They were so proud of Renae and Renae's kind of ascent through FBI management and up the ranks. Junior Aragao later became an FBI intern and accepted an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point. All of the kids are doing remarkably well. The family is great. I think they've relocated out of the country. Very, very fulfilling for Renae and I to see them kind of grow up and succeed and do well. Jerry, this was a case of a lifetime, certainly for me, and I know for Renae. We didn't do it on our own. My wife, Terry, said I peaked after 3 years. So those were tough shoes to fill.
I think, too, these types of cases are the reasons why you join the FBI. One of the reasons. This surely was one of the most rewarding and fulfilling investigations in my career, and for it to have a happy ending and for this family to be able to carry on and lead normal lives at a certain point after that. But just for such a tragic but happy ending to this story, it's very rewarding. It's one of the best cases I feel I ever worked, and it was great being able to work it with Jim, Ed, and all of our peers in the Miami Division. I've done it alone and without our law enforcement partners.
You mentioned the language specialists and translators, and I just wanted to highlight those aspects of any language. Christine and Alceo spoke English for you, but you had mentioned they spoke in Portuguese and that you needed to have a translator. I don't know what was going on with the conversations that you captured between the kidnappers. Were they in different language?
I think the only thing that sticks out for me was that we did have a Portuguese-speaking translator in the office, Ralph Braceno, and he was able to translate pretty much in real time the phone calls from Christine to Alceo because they were speaking Portuguese. It's kind of similar to Spanish in a few ways, but obviously it's its own separate language. So that was a huge asset for us to have Ralph there in the office.
Why did these kidnappers target this family? How did they know about them? What made them decide, of all the businessmen in Miami, that this is the one they were going to try to kidnap and get his money?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it comes down to Martinez probably hatched out this plan to get money. And Renae and I have always said that it was a very well thought out and detailed plan. It was just incredibly flawed. It was never going to work. They put a lot of time and effort into planning it, but it was kind of doomed from the start. I think he tasked Herrera, who had this job at this high-rise luxury condo. Is there anybody there that we should be looking at? And the Aragao's wealth and display of their wealth was over the top for even that building with their 5 luxury cars and their penthouse condo. I think Martinez gave the order and Ferrer selected the targets.
Right. Gene was very persuasive with them. Like, they felt comfortable with him. He had keys to their residence as well, not only their vehicles, that he would play with Junior when Junior got home from school. Like I had mentioned earlier, he really had won them over and they trusted him completely. I think that adds to their reason for targeting them, and then the relationship that Gene had formulated with this family and the trust that was built.
I think for me, whenever you talk about one of these kidnapping cases, one of the first things the kidnappers say is, don't contact law enforcement. And from the very beginning, from that very first phone call, and from the interviews that were conducted, they knew the FBI was on the case, but they still continued to try to go through with their plan.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it went wrong right from the beginning, and they had to kind of go to plan B, which was to lure Alceo and potentially Juliana to wherever they were.
But with the evidence that was collected by the Miami's evidence response team, it was clear, even though their main target was Alceo, getting out of the Porsche because that was the primary car that he drove, in that house, they had 4 lawn chairs similar to the ones that Christine sat in the entire time, with Velcro straps on the wrists, hole cut in the center of the seat for bathroom purposes. Their intent was to get Alceo first and then lure the family to them. But from the beginning, it went awry because he didn't arrive in the Porsche and Christine Jr. and baby Alex did.
All right, that makes sense. I'm glad you said that because I was always wondering, well, why'd they have all these lawn chairs? I'd never connected with me. All right, I think we're done with the case review.
Yeah, I think we're good.
I can understand why this is a case that is near and dear to both of you. I mean, it's a fascinating example of the work that the FBI does in these type of situations. That leads me to my standard questions. I don't know who wants to go first, but I would love to know more about both of you. The first question is, when and why did you join the FBI?
Go ahead, Renae.
Okay. I joined the FBI back in July of 1989 after I graduated with a criminology degree from Indiana University of Pennsylvania. I always wanted to be a public servant. I was interested in becoming an FBI agent, which I learned about in college. And unfortunately, with a criminology degree at that time, you needed 3 full years of work experience. I still pursued my career with the FBI and joined as an FBI police officer. I did that from 89 to 1994 when I entered the academy in July of 94. First off, this assignment was in Miami, where I met Jim and a whole cast of men and women who are very good friends to this day. Some of the best friends ever. I joined to serve and protect the American public. My mother and father didn't go to college for whatever reason. Others in my family worked in the coal mines or steel mills, and I took a total different trajectory of wanting to help and serve people. And I thought the best way I could do that was to join the FBI, the best law enforcement organization in the world.
Could you tell us what made you decide to go into management?
I think a turning point for me was when I was in Miami, probably the 10-year mark, or a few years prior to that. I had a personal situation where I was divorced. I had no ties. I didn't have children. I still don't have children. So I was able to pursue management and leadership. It wasn't just because I got divorced. That helped. That's a whole nother podcast. But working in the Miami Division for 10 years, I had the opportunity to work violent crimes aboard the high seas, counterterrorism. After 10 years, I felt I had the background and experience to lead a squad. I was in the position and had the experience and exposure from having some of the best supervisors that had mentored me and supported me in my efforts, that I felt it was time to step into the breach, so to speak, and lead men and women as an ASAC, as an SAC, and as an assistant director. I felt that the more I did it, the more I enjoyed it, and I continued doing it until my retirement. So at the 10-year mark, I decided to do that and promoted out of the Miami Division to the Counterterrorism Division at FBI headquarters, where I worked as a supervisor in the Iraq unit back in that time.
You retired a few years ago. What are you doing now?
Yes, I retired as the assistant director of the training division in June of 2021 and made my way back out to Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was an ASAC out here for a couple years and fell in love with New Mexico. I joined the Albuquerque Police Department, where I still had some friends and people that I had worked with when I was here. And I was offered the opportunity, based on leading the FBI Academy at the time, to lead their Albuquerque Police Department Police Academy and oversee training for their department. So after 32 years in the FBI, I felt I had served my purpose, and it was time to move on. And continuing in public service, I joined the Albuquerque Police Department, where I'm a commander of the Albuquerque Police Department Training Academy.
Is that a sworn position?
Yes, it is.
That's really interesting.
Jerry, I always worried about my friends in the FBI that retired prior to me and joined local, state, or city departments. And I thought, well, that's very dangerous. Why are you doing that? And better watch what you say, because here I sit as a sworn law enforcement officer for the city of Albuquerque and Albuquerque, New Mexico. And very honored and humbled and proud to have that opportunity to be able to lead, not growing up in that department, but be able to lead their police training academy. It's a very honor and humbling experience for me.
Well, they're lucky to have you. Jim, you're up. Why and when did you join the FBI?
Jerry, I joined the FBI in 1996 after a 6-year career with the Fairfax County, Virginia Police Department, not too far away from Quantico. And to be perfectly honest, it was the desire to work cases exactly like the one we just talked about. I loved working patrol and the fast reactive nature of uniform patrol, but I felt like perhaps I was destined to do something on a bigger, more impactful scale. So I joined in 96. I was assigned to Miami in April of 97, and I never left. I had a wonderful, fulfilling career in the Miami Division, working mostly violent crime and violent crimes against children for the majority of my career. In 2014, I was promoted to squad supervisor of the Crimes Against Children squad, where I served there for 4 years, and then bounced over to lead the C1 bank robbery squad for my last 3 years. So I kind of finished up where I started. I stepped down after my 7-year term was up and stayed on C1 for about a year or so before retiring in December of last year.
All right. So what are you doing now?
Well, currently I'm working as a private investigator here in Florida for a couple of other retired Miami supervisors. I'm playing a lot of tennis. I'm traveling. And after 30 years of marriage to my beautiful wife, Terry, I am officially the houseboy. I'm doing laundry and dishes and vacuuming. And I think she likes it far too much, to be honest with you. We have 3 wonderful kids. My oldest is now serving with the FBI in the Seattle division, after he was a police officer for a few years down here in South Florida.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love to hear the legacy stories. I couldn't convince any of my 3 kids to do it, but I'm still working on their friends and trying to get one of my kids' friends at least to take a shot at it. We'll see.
There you go.
Hey, anytime, I need a houseboy as well. Anytime you want to come out to New Mexico, I'll pay for your flight, and you could do some laundry and cooking out here too.
Renae, you had me at pay for my flight.
Yes, I know. And you have a free stay. So come on out anytime.
This has been fantastic. And I like to end all case reviews by giving my guest the last word. Who wants to go first?
Renae, go ahead.
All right. You know, the FBI has just been an amazing career, met amazing people like Jim and others. I mean, the list is very long, who work tirelessly and are dedicated to the mission and protecting and serving as best they can. I've had a blessed career as well. I just couldn't have imagined when I joined back in 1989 what type of career it was going to be, but it is better than I could ever have imagined, and have made lifelong friends. Just very appreciative, honored and blessed to have had the opportunity to be a special agent for the FBI.
Jim?
Jerry, thank you again for this opportunity. Like Renae said, I am internally grateful for all the friendships and experiences I had with the Bureau. I feel like I was able to help out a few people along the way, make a difference in some lives, especially working crimes against children for as long as I did, and then being fortunate enough to help guide some tremendous agents on the C1 and C18 squads in the Miami Division. I'm thankful for all the great supervisors I had along the way, folks like Terry Patterson, who helped out on this case as a young agent, and my ASAC and current EAD, Tim Langan. These are tremendous leaders who helped me along the way. I always thought that I learned more from people above me that were able to mentor me and guide me through. I know the FBI has taken its hits lately with mistakes by a very, very small few, and I feel that the criticism is mostly undeserved. And that includes attacks from former agents who I believe who are just in it for themselves and really have sold themselves out to kind of further their own agenda. We've talked about the great work done on a daily basis that generally goes unnoticed by the public and the media-driven narrative. And I just feel the FBI continues to be a great, great law enforcement agency whose mission is carried out by people who don't want or need the attention. They just want to do their work and do it very well on a day-to-day basis.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a direct link to the show notes where you'll find a photo of Jim Lewis and Renae McDermott, the original Bolo, Be on the Lookout, issued after the abduction, a photo of one of the lawn chairs with Velcro restraints, and a look at that touching and oh so cute memento the Aragoa family gave to the Miami Division. There's also a link to other FBI Retired Case File Review episodes about kidnappings and abductions. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.